Hi everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Under the Pallet Wrap. This week we're talking inventory, and more specifically inventory drift, which is where your actual inventory does not match what your systems are telling you. So what does that do to your business? What's the impact? What does it cost? And what can we do about it? And for that, we have Phil Wilson from RGIS joining us today. Phil, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Thanks, Dan. I'm Phil Wilson. I've been with RGS for about 18 months now, but I've spent the last 15 years looking at inventory within the supply chain and its consequences at retail. And before that, about 20 years working for Sainsbury's in various senior loss prevention and stock management positions. Nice to meet you.
Both for supermarket backgrounds. I'm in a minority here.
We were arch rivals in the past, Phil.
Oh, really? Oh, dear.
I was Mr. Tesco, yes.
I thought as much, you could tell.
The industry leader, I think we were called at the time. Anyway, but this is not why we were here, to bash Tesco or Sainsbury's. Go on, Keith, ask us a question before we get diverge even further.
Yeah, I mean, we've all worked with inventory everywhere we've ever worked, and it's always an absolute pain. We've all seen chaos in the warehouse, so whether it's on inbound, returns, somewhere else down the chain, how do you go about understanding where the drift's occurring, Phil?
That's a very big question, Keith. I'm not sure I can answer it in the time we have here, but basically, the bottom line is systems are great at managing stock, managing inventory, managing the entire process end to end, but sadly we have these things called human beings, and that kind of seems to be where the problems lie. And that's not a statement of everyone's rubbish at their job, but unfortunately where we do have that interaction between systems and humans, there is a propensity for things to go wrong. And I think ultimately my passion in life, if you like, is to try and unearth those issues to make the process simpler and reduce the amount of times that error can happen. I think throughout the supply chain you've got so many different touch points where you can have those issues, and to try and unearth every single one of them. You would go all the way back to the supplier inbound area, and I'll talk probably a bit more about this in a short while, but we believe the less you touch the stock, the better. If you've got armies of people counting stock in, you're likely to cause more problems than you are if you just let it in and put it into the system. But that obviously doesn't come without its own checks and balances, for obvious reasons. But so I think the less touch points you have in the supply chain, the more likely you are to have better inventory.
Where does it normally show itself the most? Like, what's the big impact that you see? Is your inventory drifts from what your system says to what you actually have? What are the signs and what do businesses see?
Well, most of my experience is in retail. I do have some sort of kind of experience in other sort of what we call verticals in our business. But in retail, and I come from a store background, and I spent a lot of my time, certainly a few years working in shops, filling up shelves and all that sort of stuff. And one of the biggest pains was when you had gaps, what we call gaps, and you'd spend, the business I'm sure would have spent millions of pounds in labour going around a shop, in every shop in Sainsbury's, and I'm sure it's the same in Tesco, Dan, trying to say, oh look, there's a gap, why is there a gap there? And it's trying to understand why the gap was there, and obviously a gap means no stock, which means no sales, which means customer dissatisfaction and loyalty issues. So, but very important thing to try and address, but typically speaking, the answer was never in the store. The answer was probably much further down the chain, and kind of trying to join those dots up to try and say, okay, so this whole shrinkage issue crystallises in a shop, but actually where's the root cause? And kind of what we do is try and understand what those root causes are.
That's when there's too much stock, because obviously that's just as big a problem in supermarkets. That would obviously show itself up somewhere else in the chain. Is that noticeable in the warehouse, or?
But again, I think it all sort of crystallises in the shop, because with chilled food, that excess stock becomes wastage, so you end up throwing it away or donating it to
at the
food
store.
banks, or at the store, yeah. So the depot will never be beholden to having that cost on their books. They'll ship out, if they've got excess stock in their warehouse, they'll just ship it out to as many stores as they can with the hope that they can sell it. And, sometimes they can, sometimes it ends up just going in the bin.
I guess
which again, another cost to the business,
I guess this becomes a bit more noticeable in a warehouse distribution centre perspective, Keith, on an e-commerce warehouse where you tend to have a very wide range but quite a low depth, and then I think your excesses and your discrepancies on a negative sense, because that is directly then your website will say, yes, we have this in stock, customer orders it and they don't get it, and that just upsets customers and pushes them to your competitors, right? But because of that lack of depth in an e-commerce warehouse generally, even excesses become very obvious very quickly, because you suddenly realize, like, how many bins have I got full of this product? So I think it's much more noticeable when you talk about a big, say a grocery warehouse for a Sainsbury's or a Tesco. It's pretty difficult. You'd have to do some pretty close analysis to recognize. I think it would be systemically you would recognize it more than you would physically, because these places have 100,000 plus locations. So it'd have to be pretty extreme for someone to eyeball it and think, that looks like we've got a lot of that, But
Yeah, well, I mean, my curiosity is piqued because you hear a lot about food waste and all the best before dates and things, and there's such a limited shelf life. How much is really chucked away as a result of inventory drift, overstocking, and what is the cost to the business? Does it truly have to be thrown away? I mean, what is the true consequence?
It's in the tens of millions. There's no doubt about that. And again, I've not worked for Sainsbury's for a few years now, but certainly in my very humble store that I worked in for a while as a produce manager, I'll be throwing £3,000 to £4,000 worth of fresh produce away every week. And that's not untypical for a retail environment.
With the fresh food, you don't see it in the supply chain so much. You don't see it in the distribution centre, because they're generally stockless environments, aren't they? So exactly. It really does flow all the way to the store and only really sits in the store. Which is why it all gets kind of pushed into that final.
I can tell you an incredible story. One of my lowest moments working in stores at Sainsbury's was when I ordered strawberries. It was during Wimbledon, and I thought I'd go gung ho on strawberries. And what I didn't realise is when I put my order in for strawberries, I was ordering the entire distribution centre's stock for my one store, and there were no checks and balances. They sent me, I think, about 3 pallets of strawberries, which is a lot of strawberries. And I ended up getting a bit of trouble and having to. We basically had a van going around the entire district, just redistributing the strawberries because I got in early with my order. I wasn't popular at the time.
It was you selling the strawberries in the lay-by on the A22 the other week.
We should have tried that. That might have got rid of them. Yeah. But of course, what happens though is my order. The buyer would have seen my order and said, "Okay, there's a lot of strawberries going on here," and they order to forecast. Something like strawberries is quite like 1 to 2 day lead time. That's quite a big order, and it doesn't take much for someone to press a button incorrectly, and the buyer will think, "Oh, crikey, okay, I'll buy all those strawberries," and we were never going to sell them.
Another example of that kind of thing happening is when you get a little bit of a data issue in your system. And I can remember from my days of working in operations at Tesco, a very memorable night where we sent an entire articulated truckload of beer to one store, and nobody questioned it.
No.
I mean, literally, and it was just somebody had made an error on the ratios of unit to case to pallet, and instead of ordering 15 cases, they ordered like 15 pallets of it.
Yeah.
But this got all the way through. It got picked. It got put down on the loading bay, got loaded onto a truck, and was sent. And it was only when it got to the store, and they were like, "My God, what is this?" And that's the problem with these bigger businesses. Those tiny little errors can turn into really massive costs. I mean, all right, it was a long life product. We could bring it back and redistribute it. It wasn't a big issue. But it just shows how easy it is. And as you say, Phil, if that's a fresh food, you make that calculation error on a fresh food, That goes all the way to the supplier. They pick extra out of the field, they package it up, they take it all the way through, and it gets all the way to a store without anybody seeing that this is wrong. Now, I think today there are systems that will pick that up and will highlight it and give you a better chance of correcting it. But it's in a big, fast-moving business like a supermarket. These things happen all the time, and that quite often ends up in the bin, right? So, and that's
the true
that's a lot of
concept
money.
of waste.
Yeah.
Are there situations where certain stores are worse than others? Are they monitored for waste? I mean, obviously, I'm used to things like carrier depots and the rest of it, all sort of scrutinised for their performance. But does it happen at a store level when they're looking at actual waste per store?
I think systems these days are a bit better, Keith. I think most times there's less human intervention now. It's kind of done on.
We've been taken out of the loop.
They're taking the humans out of the loop, and it's based on inventory. So as your inventory reduces, you'll have a kind of a target carryover number, and the system will just reorder based on what your kind of parameters are for that line. So I think the chances of my strawberry incident happening now would be very slim. They wouldn't let me touch it now and say, I want to order 1,000 strawberries. They would just, the system would just do it for me. And I think that's really helped minimise the kind of threat of over excessive stock.
Yeah. What does still happen though, Keith, it feels absolutely right. The ordering is automatic these days. It bases it on the inventory, the sales, blah, 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 all this stuff. But if a store is not maintaining accurate stock records,
here we go. Yes.
Then you still get a problem, right? Yeah. If they're not correct, because stores will, and if they're driven, the system will drive them to count and check constantly. But if they're not doing it, you get drift, and therefore it will be ordering stock when you've already got it, or it won't be ordering it when you haven't got it, because you're not telling it that we don't have any. And if the system still thinks it's got it, it won't order it. And it will also, because the sales start to drop off, it also won't be trying to trigger more sales because you're not selling it either, even though the system believes you have stock, but it's not moving. This is why businesses really should care about inventory drift, because it impacts the operation. It's costing you money. It's destroying customer trust. There are all across the business, people are impacted by these little movements away from what is correct.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, Dan, so of course what we see certainly in my world is stores are actually importing that inventory drift. So the stock was never right in the first place. So you can do all you want to maintain an accurate inventory file, but if the system that you received it with was wrong, or I don't know, 5 cases of baked beans were ordered, 4 cases were delivered, but the docket still said 5. You're already starting from a negative position, so you're constantly trying to fight the fire of not only going to say this is where we think that time could be wasted investigating these things. If you go further down the chain, that's probably where the issues originate from. I'm not saying that nothing happens in stores. Yes, I'm sure stores don't manage their inventory perfectly, but if they're up against it from the start, then they've got very little chance of doing it.
I mean, I stopped working in supermarket retailing in Tesco like 15 years ago now, more than that. And we already weren't checking in store on arrival. But because the stock is coming from an internal place, no one counted stock in the store. I mean, they counted stock to check what they've got, but on the receipt of deliveries, never. It doesn't happen. That only happens at the entry point into the company, which is at the distribution center. And I guess it kind of brings us to, we understand what drift is doing and what it can cost, but where is the biggest, in your experience, where is the biggest problem? Where does inventory drift happen the most? And we know it happens all over the place, but where do you think it happens?
Yes, I can answer that one quite quickly. I think it's mainly picking. Picking is, in my experience, by far the biggest problem, because whilst there's automated systems which pick well, pick by voice, pick by row and name and things. If things aren't correct at the point of picking, again, you don't know, because you only know what you know, so you pick what you think you picked. That goes onto a kind of a Marshall lane, goes off to where it's going to go to. That bit there is probably where I think it all kind of really kind of expands in terms of the problem. I think suppliers are generally quite good at delivering accurate stock. They have to. They'll lose reputational credibility if they're constantly wrong with what they're saying.
I share your opinion that it's not in the interest of suppliers to get it wrong, and often suppliers are blamed in the fashion world. Certainly, there's often the reaction is, "Oh, these suppliers never deliver anything correctly." It's never the case. When you go into the detail, you understand that the order confirmation process is quite human-centric. Certainly in fashion, with all the production times and the changes to production, you need to keep on top of the order. It's often email-driven, and there is technology that has been developed, but I've always found it's quite bitty. It covers the approval process, or it covers, you've got your ERPs that, in theory, cover the order confirmation process, but they're not necessarily linked to the supply chain beyond that. And that's where I think shipping teams, logistic teams, have a big part to play in understanding the whole supply chain and working with the right stakeholders and understanding how it works at every stage. But quite often it's not the supplier. They're often working with automated picking, packing systems in their warehouses, especially the big brands, not the small brands. But the small brands have less stock to deal with, and they want to sell their products and get paid. So quite often I found it's a misalignment with how orders have been set up or updated upstream. The more clarity we can provide, the better for receiving.
Yeah, with fashion in particular, there's two things with fashion. So firstly, I think, and again, in my experience, there's something called a break pack. So you'll have a t-shirt, and it could be a white t-shirt, but it will come in 10 different sizes, and those 10 different sizes are in the same box. So, okay, the supplier's giving you your 10 t-shirts in the same size, different sizes. They've gone into your warehouse, the box is open, of course someone's going to pick those white t-shirts, and if they get a size 8 t-shirt, and they accidentally pick a size 10, then bosh, there you go, you've got your first bit of inventory drift right there. The other thing, and what we're noticing, certainly in my world, is RFID is playing a much bigger role in fashion retail or fashion supply chain now. So many more retailers are going down the RFID route, which kind of eliminates the risk of mispicking and errors in shipments and those things. And I think, I'm going to make a prediction here, wildly, within 15 years, I think most, shall we say, non-reusable fashion, as in not the cheap fashion stuff, will have RFID labels in it.
We've had discussions about RFID, and in our journey in supply chain, what has not quite materialised as we expected it to. We're talking a lot about mistake proofing, which to me is just a fundamental continuous improvement mindset. Let's prohibit mistakes. You've had the advent of ASN, EDI, all this stuff. RFID has never quite taken off to the degree that you're speaking about.
No, it's been around a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it has been. I remember.
It's been around a long time.
25 years ago. Yeah.
Why do you think fast fashion, as an example, they're not picking up on it as quickly as you would have imagined?
It's cost, Keith. I think the tags are still what I would call relatively expensive for what they are.
Yeah.
I'm not in the RFID world, but one of my clients is currently implementing RFID. Let's just say they're not a fashion or a food retailer, but they're a retailer, and they're just launching into RFID now, and the tags themselves are tiny. You can put them in anything nowadays, I'm sure of it, but they're still quite expensive for what they are. Yeah. And trying to get a supplier on board to try and integrate those tags into whatever product they're supplying is additional cost for them as well. So I think there's still a price problem with RFID. We know the technology works.
But if they're aware of the cost of inventory drift, in theory, if it's going to prohibit it or reduce it significantly, it's a costly balance, isn't it? It's just, it always seems to put businesses off for some reason, doing it across the board.
I want to put an argument here that I don't think the suppliers are the issue. Suppliers are issues, and there's no doubt. And my time working in big fashion, what you find as well is you get a lot of variance across containers. So you generally have like an open to buy, which can be an entire season, right? And then you're just calling off against it. So the overall PO might take you a month to receive, but you're receiving 30 containers of that. And what's in each container can vary enormously compared to what's actually written on the documents with certain suppliers. Right? In my experience, that's always been a bit of a challenge. And as Phil said, you get like ratio packs with multiple sizes or colors within a pack, and it only adds to the complexity. And this is where that inflection point of when it steps from supplier into your business, that if you're going to get 1 point right in your supply chain, get that right, get that receiving into a distribution center is your point of clarity, right? It's the handover between supplier and business, and that's where you should put the effort in. It will drift from there without a doubt, and we can talk about that in a minute, but you have to get a starting point, and when it arrives in your business and you take ownership of it, get it right. Invest in getting that check, whether it's people, whether it's systems, whether it's automation, but that's where I would invest, because then you at least start with it right. And then, there are a number of touch points after that where it will drift, naturally, of course. But if you don't even get it right then, you're on a losing battle, because if you don't start and it arrives in your ownership, you've got real problems. And for me, that, for all the problems, and you should push suppliers, make them do better, but you should never rely on that being right. You have to take ownership at the point of arrival and get it right yourself.
I do agree with you. I think that has to be right, but I'm not necessarily sure you can't do much about it if it is wrong with the suppliers. And I'm also convinced I don't even think it is the suppliers. If it is a particular supplier, you should be able to hone in on that, especially if you're a big retailer, and fix it fast with the right people to understand who in their business can support you with ensuring those orders are accurate and getting to the root cause. But I have walked in, my first task was to reduce this 85,000 unit backlog that can't be booked in. They're supplier issues. They're not supplier issues. I had to really roll my sleeves up and work out where the root cause was, but it was our own systems usage issue. No one really understood how to use the new ERP system that had been introduced, and I had to go to bare bones and work out how to use it myself, and understand how it interacted with the WMS, and I worked out that ultimately the order that had been placed didn't necessarily match what had arrived, but like a lot of fashion orders, that happens upstream a long time before it arrives on your doorstep. So I felt that you have to go upstream a lot of times. It's almost like a funnel, in my view. So, correct me if you disagree, but I actually feel like the potential for error, in theory, if you manage it, should be like a well-oiled funnel. Less issues should happen downstream if you fix them upstream. Not always the case. There's all sorts that goes on. But
I'm going to be controversial, I think. I'm going to be controversial.
Please.
I taking Dan's point about getting the supply right, I'm 100% sold into the idea of hands-free receiving. So just don't get involved. Accept it, bring it in, let the supplier do what they need to do. Have some checks and balances there, do audits, sample audits, those sorts of things, but let them bring it in. Because the real point where you can understand the issue is probably the point of picking, which I said before. If you're a good picker and the stock isn't available to pick, you tell the system it's not available to pick. You've corrected your inventory. Now,
then you've upset a customer, Phil, because you can't supply the order.
The pick was never there to be picked, so it's not picked. So therefore,
If your website said it had stock, then if you wait till that point, then you've upset your customer, and next time they might go
I
and buy
suppose
it
in
from
an
someone
e-commerce
else.
world, you're right. But in general supply chain, I think the volumes are such that probably
If
wouldn't
it's a
happen.
shop, yeah, there's a bit of buffer there, and
Yeah.
yeah, but
But taking to your point about, and again, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of good faith receiving, which is, where you kind
green
of receive
laning, yeah,
stuff
whatever.
in good faith and suppliers. And you tend to you tend to use suppliers who are good at what they do. So you kind of, reliable suppliers will go on to good faith receiving because you'll save the labour cost of checking every delivery. You'll have much quicker invoice matching and payments. Supplier will get paid on time. There won't be this to and fro that you owe us this, you owe us that. And I say invariably, you're checking something which is correct anyway. It's the ones where, and that's what I'm saying, like doing these kind of sample audits will give you the opportunity to kind of understand what the general accuracy of that supplier is. You can then, come up with an agreement where you commute that claim back, say, well, over the last 12 weeks your invoice value was £1 million and you were 1% inaccurate, so I want 100,000 back or 10,000 back. And it kind of you can work it that way. I just think I'm definitely a light touch guy when it comes to managing stock.
To go back to Dan's point, I mean, yes, sometimes if you've got fast fashion, hundreds of units, or even food, the consequences of it being out of stock are less. It's just waste. It's costing you a lot of money. If you're working with premium fashion, you've lost out to a competitor, and the last thing you want is a customer telling you that. That is the absolute worst point in the journey. You can find out that you've made that error is when a customer says, I couldn't believe it. They've gone online and they've said, I placed an order, it wasn't there, it didn't get delivered, I had terrible customer service, it was reactive, they didn't know where to stock them, they didn't know how to answer me. That's the absolute worst point in the journey for me. Again, there's no one size fits all, is there? Because every business has their own story and their own consequences. But in certain industries, I feel like getting it right at the very beginning is integral. Otherwise, the consequences are too bad.
I agree, getting it right, but I guess it's the process you employ to make sure it's right. I think is probably where I'm slightly different because, I do think that the less you handle stock, the better. The more likely it is to go to the right place at the right time. But I do agree that you want to.
You can get it right without specifically cross-checking every single detail, handling the products more. That doesn't equate to getting it right. It's systems that work. You can overhandle, over-process. That's waste in itself. You can spend your time ensuring it's right, but to no value whatsoever down the chain. You can have 100 people on inbound checking against a piece of paper. We're spot on. Great. You're still making picking errors. You have to know your stock. You have
But
to
you
know
make
your process.
less picking errors if the stock is right. Sorry,
There's an element of truth in that.
you know,
The more you get right upstream, the more likely, like a funnel, it's going to flow right through the rest of it.
but also to Phil's point, that the less you handle it, the less likely you are to make a mess of it. That there are also some very good solutions out there that mean you can be very certain you're right, without having to handle and open every box. There's a lot of work you can do with your suppliers to get them right. There's a lot of technology that can automatically receive, right? RFID is one. But you can receive via conveyor, and just barcode scanners will tell you that this is all correct. Now it all depends on what the product is. Some things you just have to eyeball and check it and confirm it because I've done pharmaceuticals in my past, and this is a very high value product, and you need to capture a lot of information, not just the product is right, batch codes, all the there's so many authorization codes in there that you need to be able to track. You 100%, I don't care who you are in pharmaceuticals, you check every single pack to make sure it's correct, because the cost of all the risk of getting it wrong can be vast, right? So, and it just depends what the product is. But I think that the principle of knowing when it arrives in your business that at that point we have accuracy, we don't have drift, and then it comes down to how you manage your operation from then on in.
How you pick, how you pack.
To minimise, and use the right process. Keep the levels of pressure right, because you can have the best process in the world, but if your forecasting is terrible and you're just putting your operation under ridiculous pressure, guess what? They're going to make more errors, and your inventory will get worse. So I think
I'm also interested if you get it right on the point between buying and receiving itself. I'm always a bit baffled by forecasting is so crazily, wildly out. If you're so predictable for the rest, for that key part of the supply chain, but again, it happens. It's the tools they've got. It's the resources they have. It's why this investigation is so key, in my view. I had a question. Right, this will be edited. I had a question right at the tip of my tongue, which was very important. Oh yes. So, we've talked a lot about all the tools that are available, lots of technology, obviously simple things like barcode scanners, they're available to all. But when does a business, say a startup, 1 year, 2 years into their journey, and they're already facing these issues, when is the moment to call on someone to have a look? What's the first thing they should do? When does it start costing them?
That's a good question. I again think it becomes quite apparent just by looking at, if you, and Dan will probably, both of you relate to this, is that you can walk into a warehouse and know if it's well managed or not, can't you? It's quite obvious. You walk in the door and you think, well, this is a good one. One of my customers, I had a Teams call, they were taking it from their warehouse, and it was immaculate. Absolutely immaculate. I thought, this is brilliant. And we went in there, did the work, and it was as good as it looked. Others you walk into and it's an absolute mess, and you think, I'm not even sure we want to do this. You can pay us all the money you want.
You're not going to like what I'm going to tell you.
I think I think a good operator would know the state of their warehouse just by some of the standards that they're looking when they see it. And I think it's quite obvious in my mind.
Yeah, I think any of us could sense that there was an element of chaos going on, and we'd look at the right data. But when a startup is made up of a number of generalists, it's not necessarily. Inventory confuses many people. They don't want to be out of stock. They don't want too much stock. It can be confusing at the beginning how much stock they buy, and when you also don't have the capacity or the tools to check absolutely everything, and you don't know what you're looking for necessarily. When do the warning signs come in to the uninitiated? When the customer complaints come in?
Yeah, I think it is, Keith. I think quite often it's customer complaints, customer feedback. I think maybe it's a leveling off or a downturn of sales. Why am I suddenly struggling for sales? And then you start to look into it a bit more, and you might say, well, actually, we're not fulfilling every customer's order. We're quite often missing them. And then you start, well, why are we doing that? And very quickly, I think an SME will understand that actually this is really hard for me to get. I don't know this in detail enough across a supply chain. I know this bit, and I know this person knows this bit, and this person knows this bit. But smaller businesses struggle to have that overarching insight to be able to pinpoint a problem, and this is where they benefit from going external. Get somebody in. It's not costing you a lot, but just take a look. The things that you do, Keith, the things that I do, the things that RGIS would do, is that we've got people, and as Phil just said, you can walk into a business and very quickly you even get a sense of, I think I know where the problem is. You don't know it, but you kind of get if you've got a chaotic warehouse, there's a lack of process and there's a lack of control. But if the warehouse is looking good and you've still got lots of problems, therefore there's probably some integration issues around. So I think very quickly you need to bring in somebody that's got that experience of looking across your operation, because particularly smaller businesses, they've got specialists that own their bit and know their bit. They don't necessarily have the leadership because they're a small business that has got the experience across it, and that's where that opportunity to bring in a consultant, fractional guy, can make a big difference quickly.
I think we all know deep down when there's something a little bit awry. I've seen missed launches as an example from the start. I mean, that's business critical. When you've got key launch dates like Christmas, Black Friday, and you're late to deliver to retailers, I mean, you know then that there's a problem, and that is magnified everywhere through the chain.
Or it's a fashion launch that you've advertised, and everybody's waiting for that day, and if you're not ready, you lose so much, and it becomes old very quickly, right? If you miss that launch, a week later, people aren't interested. They've moved on to something else. Yeah, and that's
and often it's just going through the whole critical path in the simplest of terms, starting with the customer and going back through. Obviously, as you say, Dan, that's where it's helpful to get someone in, because it's not always simple to see the wood for the trees, shall we say, if you're in it.
And Phil, when you go into companies that are having challenges, would you say the solution generally sits in technology, in process, in training? I'm sure it's a combination of all, but where would you say most commonly your focus is?
I think it's in process compliance. Ultimately, I think whether that be through the way you receive stock, the way you pick stock, the way you dispatch stock,
transfer stock.
I think once you've if you don't follow the book, as it were, things will slightly more than likely go wrong. And I've worked with businesses who have the best procedure. You can review their procedures manual and their SOPs, and you think, wow, this is perfect. This is absolutely bob on. But then when you see the operation, you think, well, hold on, he's not.
No one's actually doing it.
He's not actually doing that bit of it, or there's a shortcut. They can circumvent that particular process, and that's kind of where I mean, ultimately, we're there to. What I do in my life is I find the problems, offer solutions, but I cut you. It's the old saying: you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So you can have the best procedures in the world and the best systems, but unless you follow them, then pretty pointless. So and that's the biggest thing I see, without doubt.
Yeah, it goes back to the old the point we make so regularly about being on the floor and having a look for yourself, rather than just assuming. There's no point bringing in systems and documents if they serve no purpose. So get down amongst the people, ask them, why are you not following procedure? Does it come down to management? Does it come down to complexity, training? There can be any number of reasons.
Oh, you'll get Jimmy in the warehouse who's been there 25 years and he's always done it his way, and that's the way it is, because he knows best. And it's hard to argue with him because he's been there 25 years, but I think, it's
our pet hate.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't like the managers who know everything.
No. Yeah. It's interesting, because there's always a lot of emphasis in businesses of know your customer, right? It's a very well-known thing. Everybody bangs on it, know your customer. But you know what? Know your business is absolutely as essential, because it's all very well understanding what's wrong at the customer end. If you don't know your business, it's going to be very hard to get into understanding where that problem sits. So
if you know your customer,
know your business is so important.
Yeah, if you know your customer, you have to understand what your business needs to do to satisfy the customer. It's crazy how often that doesn't align. No. The mindset does not align between teams. But Phil, we talked a lot about tech and solutions, and this subject comes up in every podcast. AI. How do you see AI supporting the issue of inventory drift? Have you seen any new technologies? Where do you see it going?
Well,
in
I
the
mean, I
next
I
few
don't know
years?
how much I should be talking about what we're doing in RGIS, but we're developing tools built around AI just for that very purpose of not only enhancing what we do, but making the data we hold from our customers much richer for them. So AI is, I mean, we're kind of starting small, so we're using just basically an AI assistant tool initially, which will look at data and it'll look at trends and patterns and kind of offer insight as to what that might mean going forward. But we're hoping to get to a place because we're very privileged in that we have, you know, we do store inventory, so we do stock taking for a lot of big retail companies. We do supply chain auditing for a lot of big retail companies. We do supplier inbound checking for a lot of big retail companies. So you've got 3 data points there across the entire supply chain where we capture where things are going wrong and what is wrong. So if we can kind of, and what we're trying to do is combine all of that information together to say, I can predict your next problem, and here are the tools you need to fix them. So I think AI is massive. I think certainly in my world it's going to be an absolute game changer in what we're doing. But in terms of general supply chain, I think it will become integral to forecasting. I think that will be probably that's where I see the biggest use of AI in terms of product forecasting and demand forecasting. And I also think it will also be potentially powerful in kind of assessing customer demand from a end user perspective. So looking at trends and patterns of what customers are doing and where their kind of tastes and sort of habits are taking them. So I think AI's got a huge part to play in. I don't think it'll ever replace the ability, well, say that it may do, the ability for human beings to do certain things within the supply chain. But I think it's going to have a powerful part in just kind of managing what goes in and what comes out.
We did a podcast a couple of weeks ago about practical uses of AI, and there was a really clear message that came out of that, which I think you've just just validated as well. You're absolutely right that AI has got such great power at picking out trends, right, and anomalies, and this is where, and in that episode we talked about how AI can augment the power of your team. So it's not about take your team away and put a machine in its place, but by having an AI tool that is highlighting and seeing trends, what it does is it empowers that person or that team. They don't have to do the analysis of finding the anomalies now. They can work out, why is it happening? What is the cause of that? Because sometimes, of course, the cause is nothing to do with the system, as we've just spent the last 40 odd minutes talking about. It's about people's interaction with stock, and every time they touch it, there's a risk of an error. So the AI is not always going to be able to work out why, but it will say, there's a change in the sales pattern of this product, or the pick pattern, or the inbound pattern. Go and look at that. That you need, and the power of AI is augmenting the power of your team to spend their time fixing and understanding why it's happening, because the AI is highlighting it to you.
Preventing it happening again. I think that's the key to it, isn't it? It's this kind of what
Yeah.
it will always tell you what you need to do to prevent that happening again. So yeah, I think, I mean, gosh, my total view on AI is I think it's going to be the end of all of us, but that's hopefully a long way down the line. But I think AI is going to be particularly powerful in supply chain. Yeah.
And I do think that beyond, the AI and analysis, there are some fantastic tools and solutions that can help accuracy. Right? I think the automation of our operations, which again is not necessarily replacing people, but it is augmenting them and giving them a much greater degree of productivity and accuracy. There are some fantastic solutions that can manage the receiving visually by weight, and you get the cameras on the packing station that can immediately highlight you didn't put in the right product. I think that the power that's out there, which is some of it's extremely expensive, and you need to be a big retailer to really be able to do it. But there's also some relatively, on your packing stations, having a camera that can visually recognize product is not an expensive tool. and it can really have a major impact on your customer fulfillment and customer satisfaction if you're
I saw
picking
something.
up before it goes out that you've made.
Yeah, I saw something recently. I think I can't remember if it was a news article, and it was a big retailer. I really can't remember which one it was. Had their home delivery was all picked by robots. You know, everything, just hundreds of robots just whizzing around a grid, picking out stock from the floor. And I think that's incredible. You know, that's the technology, and that will use AI, I'm sure. And that was blew my mind.
Yeah, there are some amazing solutions when you're really operating at scale, but there are also some very good value ones where that can be deployed relatively low cost and in a modular sense, so you don't have to go big bang and put your
Yeah,
business at risk. You can just test, pilot, learn from it, and adjust. And because the solutions are now much more configurable, and the barrier to entry on moving from purely manual, people-driven operations to operations that are augmented with machinery and with solutions that make your people so much more effective is not as big a barrier to entry as people probably think. It's actually not that expensive.
yeah, I agree with that.
So, where do we land with this topic? Who owns inventory drift in the business, in our view? Receiving, upstream, everybody? What would you say, Phil?
And everybody, I think, has got a part to play. I think everyone's got some kind of influence on whether the inventory is accurate or not. I think that is without doubt. I think better use of technology will have a big part to play. And what I mean by that is being compliant with it, doing what you should be doing with it. And I think there's no one area where I'd say focus on that and you'll fix your problem. I think you kind of do have to kind of focus on all the different touch points throughout the chain. I think that's the only way to really solve it. Yeah.
So a good future for inventory managers.
Well, I think they've got
I think
somewhere. I think.
Sorry. I think if what I would say is, that every time you touch a product, you're at risk of it moving. Every time you enter something into your system, you're at risk of making an error. Bill said it earlier, only touch the product when you need to. And if you don't need to, then don't, because that means it won't be wrong. But there are some very key inflection points, and I know I keep going on about it, but that entry point into your business is the point where you've got to make sure you're right, and then adhere to process, have processes, and follow them up. Make sure they're being done correctly.
Your stock is your business. Make sure it's accurate.
Absolutely.
Right, well, thanks everybody for joining us for another episode. I think we could have spoken for another hour on this topic. I'm sure it will come up again. Thanks, Phil, for your participation. It's been a great chat. Remember, everybody, to like, share, subscribe, and add your comments and points and questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil. Interesting conversation. Really enjoyed your insight. It's great to have you on.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
See you all next week.